One of the big challenges you'll have starting this class is learning what might be for you a second language. Could be a third or fourth, who knows? But learning a new programming language. And like learning a spoken language learning another language can be easier or harder depending on where you came from. So, for an English speaker to learn an Asian language is typically harder than it would be for us to learn, like, say, German or perhaps even Spanish or French, where between Spanish and French and other romantic languages is quite simple. And I'm told it's much easier to learn other languages from the region. So if you speak Korean, it's easier to learn perhaps Mandarin or Japanese or something like that. Again, I'm fairly ignorant on that aspect of language learning, but maybe you can agree or disagree with me there. So really, part of understanding a new programming language is understanding the similarities and differences. So there's always a paradigm question. Is it a functional programming language? Is it an object-oriented programming language? An aspect-oriented programming language? Something along those lines. If there's a change in paradigm, it makes it a little bit more difficult. Um, there's also a question of capabilities. Sometimes a language does things that the other language won't, and there won't be any way of doing that in another language, at least not natively, or you have to get a library or get some tools. Otherwise, there might be things you used to have to do manually in a language that all of a sudden your new language does fairly implicitly. I remember, for instance, when I was learning action scripts for my master's degree 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Um, I was trying to figure out how to parse an XML inside of ActionScript because Java had a whole library for it. It was quite involved to go off and do that. And in ActionScript, you basically just say, open this, and it automatically parses it as an object, and it creates an object for you, and you go and use it. So I was prepared to spend an hour writing code to parse my XML, and ActionScript does it instantly. Not very flexibly. It just kind of does it the way it does it. But it was quite cool. It saved a bunch of time once I figured that out. So the features, the limitations of every language is important to understand. There's also preferences that the creator puts into it, syntactical choices, how the tools are set up, the ownership model of whether it's free and open source or whether you have to buy tools for it. Um, you know, I, Sometimes the development tools are free and the runtime tools you have to pay for. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes it's all free. So there's all sorts of nuances that you should understand about the tool. And so there's a lot of different ways we can factually compare languages. So for example, Java and C++, um, we can talk about what's the same. They're both support functional programming or object-oriented programming. They both are fairly strongly typed. You have to declare the types of variables that's coming along, and they're more similar than dissimilar as far as syntax goes. There's definitely nuances, there's definitely differences, but there's other aspects that we'll see behave, and the syntax is exactly the same. You can forget which language you're coding at certain parts of the process. Um, the biggest thing is they're both multi-purpose languages that are used in a wide variety of solutions. You can build web pages, you can build embedded apps, you can build all sorts of things in either one of them. So they do have a lot of resources and capability, and a lot of places you can look up information on them. There are some very big differences, though, that can be quite challenging. So one of them being memory management. Java does it for you. You don't have to allocate memory. You don't have to go clean up after yourself. But in C++ or any C language, you have to be very aware of those things. Java is the notion of write once, run anywhere. So you write your code, it compiles to bytecode. It's up to virtual machines to run it. I built apps that immediately I go back and forth between the Mac and the PC, and I can't tell the difference at all. Where C compiles to a platform. Almost everything we're going to be talking about, we'll talk about Visual Studio. That Visual Studio is the link to the platform. So for me, most of what you'll see is on Visual Studio on a PC. I have a Mac laptop as well. I have not looked at installing Visual Studio there yet, just because I haven't needed to. But totally different paradigm. I have to completely recode everything. So I can code once, compile anywhere, essentially, is where that goes. The error management approach is pretty different in C++. There's still exceptions. They actually look a lot the same, but when you need to call them or how they work is quite different. And there's a big difference in supporting libraries. Java has a ridiculously extensive supporting library network. C++ has them, but how I integrate them and include them is very different. Now, the biggest thing I'll say in learning a second language, and I've gone through because of instruction purposes, I go through this fairly regularly where I pick up a new language and forget parts and remember parts and carry over parts and don't carry over parts. But syntax, generally speaking, is going to be habitual. Ideally, it should be habitual. You shouldn't have to think about syntax. You should just read it and write it without thinking about it. But beyond syntax, there's many other things that are also habitual. The ways you design your code, the ways you structure your code is going to be based off your original language. So your formatting is going to be off of that. Your syntax is going to be off of that. Your design approach is going to be off that. The way you approach algorithms is going to be based off of that. And just being aware of it, it's not a problem. It's just a reality. It's the way our brain works. But being aware of it will help you partially reduce your frustration and also maybe occasionally remind you of what was going on. And the story I like to tell is I took a robotics class for my PhD, and we had to write something in MATLAB. And I hadn't done MATLAB in forever. So I was trying to multiply two values, and in C, Java, Python, whatever language, you multiply two values, you get a value back. In MATLAB, I was getting a array of values back. Like, what the heck is this? How can I take one value and multiply it by an array? Well, you can in MATLAB. It's allows. Sorry, I sneezed there. MATLAB allows you to multiply a scalar across, into a vector, and it's just part of the language. But forgetting that my habit was not its habit really, took me a while to wrap my brain around it. And it's probably a half an hour until I sorted out. Oh yeah, I'm coding in a different language. So there's many different approaches to learning any new language, and this class we're learning C++. So the traditional way you might go off and learn it is the idea of a tutorial. You'll sit through and hear some lectures, and then you'll go do your homework. It works. It can work, particularly if you never felt totally comfortable. If this is your second language and you still, were kind of working out, you don't totally feel habitual in your first language, tutorials would be a great way for you to follow along and continue to work on stuff. Until you build up the habits of coding, whatever language it is, you might not be able to use the second approach as easily or as readily. But the way I typically use it is experimentation. So I start with a tutorial. I take their exercise, I put it together, and then I just start playing with stuff. And then I start, well, what if I did this? Well, what if I did that? And a lot of these lectures and a lot of the assignments I'm going to talk about will get you towards playing with stuff. You know, I have you code stuff in the language you came from. In Java is the one talked about here quite a bit. In order to kind of trigger your muscle memory of programming, and then I'll have you code the same thing in C, C++, and just to give you I know the algorithm now. I remember what I did. I know how to test it. Let me just worry about moving over the syntax and see what's different. See how things change. And so there'll be a lot of times where I'll give you a tutorial on things and I'll let you play with that. There'll be occasions where I don't give you a tutorial on something that I want you to practice learning through experimentation, because that's what much of new innovation happens in the computing world. Don't get me wrong, there's tons of videos. People are always making videos out there. Some of them are great, some of them are crap. But there's also technologies that are so new, nobody's had time to do that yet. Nobody's had time to explain that yet. And so another skill that I want to hopefully engender in you is how to learn new technologies, how to break it down and do it on your own. So if you find something that you need a tutorial on, ask. I can add a new video. I can create something. We can talk about it. But also know that occasionally I'm trying to show you this process of experimentation. But remember, you get to choose your path. I have the idea of agency baked inside of there. You're going to be able to create what you want to learn and how you're going to learn it through your course plan. And so use that to kind of reach out and let me know other ways I can help you learn stuff. Don't think that just because I didn't provide something that I didn't want to share something. I might have ran out of time, or I might not have even thought of it. You might be like, hey, you gave us a tutorial on how to use the power function to do 2 to the 7th power in C. Nope, I haven't done that. Honestly, I don't know how to do it necessarily off the top of my head myself. But the way I explored that is got a problem and said, oh, well, let me go off and build a problem. Oh, I did factorial function. Let me Google that and find it out. And so we'll do a little bit of that as well. But if you can't figure it out that way, then let me know and we'll get something a little bit more formal. All right, so that's going to set up. We're going to continue to dive in a little bit about this intro to C++ and some of the differences within Java. So keep up for those videos. But remember this strategy. You do not have to go tutorial, tutorial, tutorial. If you just want to start working, try it out. Come back and use the tutorials. And then also, if you're going from one tutorial to the next and you don't know something that you need for your project, that might be intentional. And certainly the quicker path might not be for me to make a video and you to wait for that, but to maybe watch some of the working on stuff videos and you'll see some techniques for how to go find more information on your own.